housing panel is... We're all just going to say the same thing to you. It's not bloody rocket science, is the first thing to say. So I'm president of the Chartered Institute of Housing. We're the professional body for housing, and we work across the UK and beyond, and we also work across tenure. So one of the things to say, one of my first answers normally to how do you solve the housing crisis is actually have a word with some of your colleagues across the devolved nations, because one of the interesting things about housing in the UK is that we've got 4 completely different housing systems. So one of the things we normally touch on is right to buy. Right to buy is going to end up being pretty much an English thing. I think that it raises some interesting questions for a potential new Labour government on that. We would say that there are 3 main issues around housing. There's supply, affordability and welfare, and they're inextricably linked. Andrew's absolutely right. We've not built enough since the late 60s. And there was this time post-war and in the 1950s where, and if you look at, it's really interesting to look at some of the election literature from the 50s where there is this competition going on. It is a bit blowing pissing off the wall, although I probably shouldn't say that in public, particularly not in here. But there is this competition about who can build the most. And we've got away from that. One of the things we find immensely frustrating is all the political rhetoric around housing is arguing about who has done what, where, when over the last 30 years, and I think it would be helpful for absolutely everybody if we could just agree that all political parties over the last 30 years have failed to build enough housing. There are complex reasons for that, and one of the things that's quite frustrating when we hear, well, it took a Tory government to start building council housing again. It actually took some great work from John Healey and his team, which, to give Grant Shapps credit, and it's not necessarily something that many people in this room would do, he actually continued that work with housing revenue account reform in 2011, and that's really important because it actually allowed self-financing for council housing. It's one of those boring but important things. It also shows that if you get a cross-party consensus and you get some really, really clever people talking about it, you can do it. I think Andrew's absolutely right about you need the political will to do it. You need to make this happen. I'd recommend if you do a Google search for a friend of mine, Colin Wiles. He wrote a fantastic Inside Housing piece, probably in about 2015, about somebody called Joseph Bazalgette. I don't know if he's known to any of you. His great-great-great-grandson, I think, gave us Big Brother. But so we'll perhaps concentrate on the achievements of the older Bazalgette. He built London's sewers, and I think in the early 1850s when we had something called the Great Stink. And it wasn't just poor people at the time who were suffering from the effects of lack of sewage in London. It suddenly meant that those sitting in the House in Parliament could no longer sit because the stink from the Thames was so great. And it took 9 days. It took 9 days then to get from, oh my goodness, this is a problem, to find the money, enact the legislation and commission somebody to start building London's sewers. It can be done if we decide it should be done. Building social housing solves more problem than social housing waiting lists, and I think that's something we need to work harder to get across. So the more social housing there is, the less that we need to rely on far more expensive and less secure private rented sector housing, which then frees up properties for people who are able to access and want to access the property market. Social housing helps with, obviously, with homelessness, but also, as I say, with owner occupation. It helps build communities and it helps to save lives. The bedrock of absolutely everything, and people will have been to sessions on health, they've been to sessions on education, been to sessions on work. None of those things stack up unless you've got places for people to live. So it's a great frustration, as this is going on the web, not disappointment. It's a frustration to us that we're going to see another housing minister. I think it's going to be 7 since 2010. And I think Grant Shapps and Yvette Cooper are the only housing ministers in the last 20 years to serve more than 2 years. If we're serious about housing, we need to invest in social housing. We need to do what Andrew has argued for in the past, is treat housing as infrastructure. Spoken about that more than most politicians. Take it off the way we look at public debt. It's a really good use of money. Invest in social housing and improve some lives along the way.
Brilliant. Brilliant, thank you. And finally, Greg, can you tell us what
yeah.
Maybe you as well as Shelter, right?
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Well, I was just going to start by reminding people, we're talking about this as a market, just how quite a broken market the housing market is. We've just reached the point where we now have more than 300,000 people homeless in Britain. That's a big number, but it masks a far bigger problem than even that, of actually millions of families who are in accommodation that they're squeezed into, far too many people in a home, or unaffordable for them at a reasonable amount of their income. These are big, deep-seated problems. The only part of the market that's growing is the part of the market that people don't want to be in, which is private renting. It works for some people, but for many people in the private rented sector, it is that experience of insecurity, rising rents, uncertainty about your future. And this is a market which we expose children to in a way that I actually can't think of another market where there's no additional protections for children. We had a family arrive that I met at one of our hubs in the run into Christmas who were being evicted with a 6-week-old baby. I can't think of another market where we think that there's no rights that accrue to being a children, or that you get any different treatment for being a family with a new child. And yet, 1 in 4 of our children are growing up in the private rented sector, and half of those have moved more than twice in the last 2 years. So think about trying to put your children through school. I'm sure people here today trying to put their children through school, trying to build a life, put down roots. The private rented sector is not a place that people want to be. And I mean, you might say to me, look, these are big problems. Britain has problems. That's no secret. But the thing that I think unites all these different ideas is they're actually getting worse. So this is an area, this is a market where these problems are growing and increasing, and most of the stuff we're doing is not addressing them. Why is that? Well, I actually don't think we're making a serious attempt at the moment, for the reasons the other people on the panel have said, to actually fix this problem. I don't think we're seriously trying to fix it. I don't really think anyone is. I look at the government and I think some of the things they're doing are good, but most of what the government is doing is actually making this problem worse. Look, there's good things that will happen this year. Letting agent fees will be banned. We're hoping that Karen Buck's private members' bill, the Fitness for Human Habitation bill, will secure second reading this year. But look at where the money is going into this system. Help to Buy, big stamp duty cut. This is money going in. The explicit purpose and result of which is to increase prices, not reduce them. So I don't see any evidence that the government's policy programme is actually making a difference to this. I don't think the house builders are incentivised to solve this crisis for us. They've got a strong vested interest in parcelling up properties to bring them out at just the right rate to keep prices high and to keep the market stable. And we've given them a system where affordable housing is a punishment for them rather than something they're encouraged to want to do. And I mean, if people have seen some of the research Shelter's been doing on the viability rules, we've not only made it a punishment, we've actually given them the tools as house builders to circumvent the rules so that they don't actually have to build the affordable housing that we want. Jeff Fairburn, people will have seen him in the news recently, is taking the largest bonus in UK corporate history. I don't mean in the housing sector. I mean the largest bonus in UK corporate history for doing well at taking advantage of the government's Help to Buy scheme. These companies and organisations, I don't blame them individually. They are operating in a system where people know there is no way in which they can solve the problems of social policy that we face, and therefore they operate in a system where they just do their best to get their return and get out. I mean, think about all the creativity in British business over the years, great British businesses. The biggest bonus in history is going to a housing provider at a time when homelessness is rising and none of these problems are being solved. What do we do about all that? Well, I'm going to agree a lot with my colleagues on the panel. I think I would just say three things, though. I think before you get into the technical answers to this, I think you have to acknowledge as a country that we've started thinking about houses and homes in the wrong way, and we need to get back to the idea that a home is a more fundamental right that we all need. It is fundamental to pretty much everything else. My charity spends a lot of time dealing with people who are rough sleeping, trying to move people out of homelessness and into having a home, and they often have a wide range of problems. But they have a wide range of problems because they're homeless in most cases, not the other way around. And so you have to start from the principle that a home is fundamental and a right for everybody. And then I do think that then invites you to make two really big changes. The first is to rebalance the relationship between people who rent and people who are landlords. That relationship is not drawn appropriately at the moment to give people a secure home. And then the third thing is you need to use the power of government, the power of the state, as my colleagues have said, in order to build far more affordable housing.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got lots of thoughts there about how we think more about housing as infrastructure, some of the kind of psychological effects of the way we treat housing. I really liked your point about the fact that it's seen as a punishment for developers, and therefore they will try and make it as little as possible and never fully incorporate it. But now we turn to you. So I'll take some questions from the floor. We'll answer it and hopefully get a big discussion going. We got a mic? Yeah. Can I get the woman in grey there, please? Thank you first.
Hi, thanks very much for your really insightful comments. I'm actually public body work in housing myself. But one